I am going to talk about climate change, air pollution, and seasonal depression. And this is something I call my scientist for future change in my career, because I have not been doing sustainability research until recently. But then I thought, so I came from one topic and then I started another. And from that, I completely jumped into environmental aspects. And I want to encourage all the scientists who are out there to consider that, because there is a lot more funding now for sustainability aspects. So if it's not your own, I don't know, wish to contribute to this topic, then do it for the funding, for the money. So whatever reason is good. How do I proceed on these slides? Okay, so so we all agree climate change is there, is real, is bad. You might have heard about mental health problems related to climate change, such as eco-anxiety. I don't want to talk about that. It's a very problematic concept, but you might or might not have heard that there are also other effects of climate change on mental health. And that's what I'm going to talk about today with, let's say, two examples that are mildly related to each other. So we all know smoking is bad for our health. Yeah, but what about driving a car? Of course, if you drive your car instead of walking, you waste the opportunity to move, and then it's bad to drive a car. But there is something else about driving a car that makes driving a car similar to smoking. So we know smoking increases the risk for all kinds of cancer. Of course, first of all, lung cancer, but Audrey Hepburn, she smoked 3 packages of cigarettes a day. Among other reasons, to stay skinny, but that's another discussion. But her cancer that made her die very early was not lung cancer, it was another cancer. So any kind of cancer is induced easily by smoking. So what is a less well-known fact, and here we come back to the cars, is that particulate matter exposure increases lung cancer risk and mortality because of other diseases independently of smoking. So driving your car and causing particulate matter is as bad as smoking, maybe, for you and the people around you. So what is particulate matter? These are tiny particles that are suspended in air. They are measured by diameter, smaller than 10 micrometers, smaller than 2.5 micrometers, or smaller than 1 micrometer, and are therefore referred to PM10, PM2.5, or PM1. And how small is that? So this is an average human hair, and you can see the orange circles. They illustrate PM10 and PM2.5. So particulate matter reaches the lungs because the filter that is provided by our nose and our upper airways, because of moisture, because of hair that we have there, not in the airways, in the nose. These particles that are smaller than 10 micrometers in diameter pass that filter. So, and they reach the lungs and remain there for a very long time because the lung is not able to effectively clean itself. And the smaller the particles, the deeper they go, the more they can penetrate the borders of your body and the world. So air pollution is by the WHO recognized as the silent killer, and we don't talk about it, but it's there. There are every year around 7 million deaths because of air pollution in households or because of traffic. And the main reasons are stroke, heart diseases, and lung cancer. So 7 million. And I could not help, but I had to make this comparison. Worldwide, annually, 7 million die due to air pollution. And within more than 2 years, 6 million died to COVID. Mapping that to Iceland, because this conference is here in Iceland. In Iceland, annually 60 people died due to air pollution, and 101 so far due to a COVID infection. So I think we should actually worry about air pollution. And I think, I mean, I totally agree with the smoking kills signs on the cigarettes, but I think we should have that sign also on the cars. So particulate matter is worse the smaller the particles are. So smaller particles, starting at 2.5 micrometers in diameter, are more dangerous than the bigger particles, because they leave the lungs and enter the cardiovascular system. And by that, they reach, for example, the unborn child in pregnant women. And they can change your blood pressure. And as you might know, elevated blood pressure is the main cause for stroke. And stroke is the main cause for long-term disability and death. And now that's why I am talking about this. These small particles also reach your brain. And you might wonder, okay, how does this stuff cause cancer other than lung cancer? Lung cancer somehow makes sense. But the reason how particulate matter induces cancer is that particulate matter can have epigenetic changes as a consequence. Now, I'm not the geneticist. There are other people in the audience I know who know this far better than me. But as I understand it, particulate matter induces deactivation or activation of certain genes by which it can induce cancer. And not only cancer, it can increase the frequency of allergies and asthmatic attacks and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So all these respiratory things that we don't want to have, but also middle ear infections. And now, very interesting for me as a brain scientist, it also affects the nervous system. I said it enters the blood system, it passes the blood-brain barrier and ends up in your brain. And there, it can have very long-term effects, especially in children, because their nervous system is in a very sensitive phase of development. And the mechanism by which particulate matter hampers the development of the young nervous system or the functioning of the fully grown nervous system is neuroinflammation. That's a term that we like to use a lot now in brain scientists. But you know you have neurons in your brain, and you might know you have also something else in your brain that are the microglia or all kinds of glia. And some of them act like the cleaning agency in your brain. And they clean out toxins and debris and all kind of stuff. But they might get affected by particulate matter and get more aggressive in their cleaning activity. And by that cause inflammation, smoldering activity of inflammation. So not high, like a level of inflammation, but like an elevated level that is continuing over a long time. And I would like to mention one thing that was discussed recently that could be due to particulate matter, and that's ADHD. It's not my biggest worry, but I mention this because Iceland is so worried about ADHD. It's a big topic here. And it was found that dementia is actually linked to cognitive dysfunction in elderly citizens is linked to particulate matter in Mexico City, for example. And the same effect was found also in children. So there could be a link to ADHD and further consequences. I mentioned already stroke, but other diseases like white matter disease, damage to blood vessels in the brain, which is again then a cause for stroke, coronary diseases, coronary infarct, and we already mentioned the weight of unborn children, just like smoking. Okay, these were all long-term effects. You might say, this is maybe something that concerns me in 20 years, 40 years. That is what you hear from smokers. Yeah, I smoke now, but I don't care what happens in 40 years. With particulate matter, it's a bit different because there is a study that found that particulate matter can increase your risk of dying on a day-by-day basis. So they found that an increase of particulate matter 10, the least dangerous one, yeah, of 10 micrograms per cubic meter on a day increases the number of hospitalizations by a factor 10. So 10 times more hospitalizations on days where you have 10 micrograms more. And mortality also almost by a factor of 10. This research is interesting because the WHO recommends that the annual average of PM10 should be below 20 micrograms, not 10, as I just said. 10 are already bad, but below 20. So that's maybe not strict enough. And the 24-hour average should be below 50 microgram, which is way more than 10. But maybe we can deal with a couple of days on which we die in the year. These things are even worse in Iceland. And I didn't find an official reason for that, but the recommended annual average is less than 40 micrograms. And okay, we comply with the WHO recommendation for the 24-hour average, but the 40 microgram average is strange. And my impression when I looked at the actual numbers that we have recorded here in Iceland is that they chose this limit because we are actually very often just below 40. So this is just chosen to make us feel good. Everything is okay. Now, where does this particulate matter come from? Here in Akureyri, this should be a big topic because we are the town in Iceland with the most particulate matter. So that's why we are talking about this today. And it is because in Akureyri, people use a lot spikes on their tires in winter. And particulate matter is correlated perfectly with the use of spikes on tires. If you ban spikes, you are mostly rid of particulate matter. Another fun fact, if you look at the air quality measurements that you can like watch in real life on the homepage of the Environmental Agency of Iceland, you can see that everything that is below 50 microgram per cubic meter of PM10 is considered to be good air quality. So it's green. Then don't trust the color code there. And this graph here actually shows you that here in Akureyri, there are several times of the year where we are above 250 microgram and way above 50, of course. So again, spikes are the main cause for particulate matter. If we look into the composition of particulate matter, for example, in April, we see that it's almost 100% asphalt, so the abrasions from the street. Of course, spikes are used to drive on ice and snow. The arguments of the people who use spikes is it's safer. Of course, if you want to drive fast, it's safer to drive on spikes. So no reason to object on that. I think there is something else that we could do before banning spikes altogether. I mean, driving with spikes on snow is fine. You don't create any particulate matter there. It's bad if you drive with your spikes on a dry street, right? And the legal regulations, therefore, allow to drive on spikes from October to April. And then there is a grace period where the police says, yeah, actually it's banned, but we don't sue you, of about a month until May or something. But in October, March, and April, because of climate change, the streets are often dry. And that is when we get these peaks here in particulate matter. So we should adapt our laws with climate change. We should shorten the period in which you are allowed to drive on spikes. Now, how does that relate to the second topic I want to talk about today? So air pollution was also found to be linked to depression, and long-term exposure to particulate matter 2.5 is related to anxiety. And there have been found short-term associations between PM10 exposure and suicide, which should be very alarming. As a psychologist, if someone is depressed, you're of course worried, but you are doing everything you can if you hear someone has suicidal thoughts. So we should do everything we can about this. And I got interested into the topic of seasonal depression recently, and obviously particulate matter in Iceland and in other places occurs annually, always at the same time. So it's seasonal. And how does that relate to seasonal depression? Well, okay, we have two main types of seasonal affective disorder. We have summer depression and we have winter depression. Winter depression is the more common one, especially in Iceland. Summer depression, winter depression look kind of the opposite picture. Winter depression comes with more sleep, weight gain, increased appetite, craving for sweets. Summer depression comes with the opposite: insomnia, weight loss, loss of appetite. Summer depression begins in May to June and lasts for about a season, a bit longer. And I found it quite interesting that these forms of depression happen actually right after those periods with elevated levels of particulate matter. So there could be something going on in the brain that we should examine better. Summer depression is known to be linked to environmental factors. And now I'm gonna switch topic, not completely, but a little bit, because summer depression was so far not related to particulate matter, but to temperature. And now we're going to talk again about climate change. It correlates with heat and humidity. So in Iceland, we have almost no summer depression. If you ask 300 people, you have 10 who feel bad in summer, but you have like 10% of those that feel bad in winter. And there seems to be a reversed rate, like in Alaska and other Nordic countries, Norway, Siberia. We have about almost 10% of winter depression, but literally no summer depression. In most countries, there are not even numbers for that because no one even cares measuring summer depression in those countries. But in hot countries, so with countries with hot summers, you have almost 10% summer depression. So there is this reverse rate and almost no winter depression because the winters are nice there. And here in Iceland, the summers are nice. So how does that relate to climate change? A lot, yeah. We have had quite an increase in temperature. People complain in Central Europe every summer, oh, it was not that hot when I was a child. And I mean, look at this map. We had warm summers in Central Europe. You went to the swimming pool, you were fine. But this is changing now, and people feel these changes, and the hospitals feel these changes because we have more strokes in summer. And we are getting a completely different map here in Central Europe in the next couple of years, where the summers will be unbearably hot and people will start to feel very bad in the summer. So I think we are going to see a rise in summer depression in those countries, which people should care about because seasonal depression was found to impact economy a lot because people are not able to work anymore when they feel depressed. I mean, we know that about major depression, but it's true also for seasonal depression. So to conclude this talk, even if mental health is not the main concern of climate activists, and I fully agree with that, we can use this argument towards policymakers, and we can say, look, climate change causes summer depression in many countries where you have been fine before, and that will impact economy. And also depression is a very sexy topic that many people can relate to. So you can attract media attention by that. And that's why our next research project, where a lot of students participate, is about environmental aspects and environmental factors affecting seasonal depression. Thank you very much for your attention. And I would also like to remind you of our conference next year. I want to reiterate what Georgia already said, 31st of March, 23. We are already looking for speakers. So if you want to be in this conference next year, or if you want to contribute to the student session, please reach out to us. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. I'm not going to throw that far. It will never reach you.
Thanks, Yvonne. First of all, my compliments on a very, very clear and well-timed presentation. It was extremely easy to follow for us non-scientists in the room, and short and on point, and really got your message home. So I think most people here will agree that there's a problem with this particulates. There are similarities to smoking, but the solutions are much harder to find. And I'm sure you've examined this because of massive externalities and massive transaction costs. Whereas smoking mostly affects the smoker, they can be more easily incentivized to give up. How do we address this when it's an externality problem, when most people's driving affects somebody else? I mean, it's like the climate change problem, but in a kind of national environment. And so you've got massive transaction costs and externalities. How do we address it as a matter of policy?
Yeah. So on a global base, I'm not worried about particulate matter. More, my daughter growing up in this bad air, but that's a personal problem. So I think the particulate matter discussion, I like it so much because getting rid of the particulate matter might also help us get rid of some cars, which affects the bigger scale. But what can be done if we just want to address particulate matter? I mean, I'm so thankful that you asked this question because it's ridiculous here. We have adults driving with their cars to work, which is maybe half a kilometer, but at the same time, they send their kids by foot, which I'm totally, please send your kids by foot, but the kids walk in this dust and the adults will drive to work. Yeah, I can drive my car. So I think we should do something here about the mentality. We should just increase the willingness of people to walk. And I mean, there are several measures that have been examined in other countries. The best way to get rid of particulate matter is, of course, to ban the use of spikes. Many countries in Europe have done that. Because of climate change, it's not necessary anymore to have spikes, or they are just using salt on those few days where they need. So that's the most effective thing. What other countries, like Nordic countries, do when they have still like a big lobby of car drivers wanting spikes on their tires, but having a big time with particulate matter, let's say, they ban the use of spikes in certain streets. And I think that would make sense if you think about schools. So ban the use of spikes on the streets where kids walk to school. That would be most streets in Akureyri, I think, because we have schools everywhere. Ban the use of spikes on those days where the particulate matter is high, or just have car-free days on those days where the streets are dry. I would suggest what Iceland can easily do, and this should not be a problem, is just to enforce that people follow the law. Because I don't know, 2 years ago, I saw a newspaper article 1 month after the day where you are not allowed to use your spikes anymore. 1 day later, an article where the police says, from today on, we will start suing those who are still driving on spikes. And I think, why do you have that day a month earlier? Why don't you start then with suing people if they didn't change their tires? So there are several approaches to solve this issue, but I, of course, prefer those that limit the use of cars, because that has also a positive side effect of less CO2. More comments?
I have a few questions.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So this idea of cost externalization, I think, is a very interesting one. Have you done any digging into how much money we're spending on these increased hospitalizations versus the costs associated with doing things like extra snow removal, or putting down salt in addition to sand, and things like this?
Yeah. No, not really. I mean, healthcare costs are a completely other topic, and I'm not an expert on that. But my feeling is whenever I apply for a grant, I always write a line about, oh yes, and this disease causes so many healthcare costs. So you can always argue with that, but you will not make a change. But now looking at the situation here in Akureyri, I've been talking to a lot of people and they all say, yes, the spikes, they cost us so much money because the spikes also destroy the streets. So Akureyri basically has to renew all the main streets every year because the spikes just erode the streets so much. And in spring, then your streets look like this. It's like driving on rails, basically. And there are some politicians saying, well, this is a big chunk in our budget. But then there is the lobby which says, no, we don't want salt on our streets because that ruins the cars. I think still the option is to, I don't drive on spikes. It's a matter of how fast you want to drive. It's as simple as this, and how fast can you drive in town? I mean,
And of course, you might also have to make some other strategic decisions. Like there are definitely some hills I would not dare go up or down without spikes, but you just find an alternative route, you know.
Yeah, or you put spikes on your bike. Many people do that. That will never cause that much particulate matter than having it having them on your car. Yeah.
And I'd also like to make one point about the enforcement of the the laws about the seasonality of having spiked tires. My understanding is that the enforcement actually only occurs if there's a need to write a police report for another reason. So if you get in an accident, that's usually when the enforcement happens. So there's no actual real enforcement of these laws as is, at least that's my understanding, which I think is kind of weak.
Probably. It's the same thing with several laws where I reached out to the police in Akureyri. Indeed, I mean, not about the spikes, but about another problem here. A lot of people like to have their engine running while going to the shop or while cleaning off the snow from their cars or while having breakfast. The police doesn't do anything about it because they say, well, if you have the engine running while you clean off the snow, we don't consider that as having the engine running without purpose, because it's on purpose to warm the engine up or to warm the car up. Whereas I don't think that is in line with the law from 1998 that says you are completely banned to do that, to let your engine running without driving. So you're only allowed to have it running on a traffic light or whatever. And yeah, I mean, that is the thing with the spikes is they had this newspaper announcement, we are going to sue people, but I don't know. I have never seen police stopping people and saying, oh, you are still driving on spikes, but maybe they do in some places. Yeah.
And I just have one other question. This one's related to psychology. I would imagine that as climate change worsens, we could expect to see more of the seasonal affective disorder reach a clinical threshold. Is there any data supporting that, as the temperatures are becoming more extreme, we're seeing more people sort of cross the barrier to actually become clinically depressed?
Mm-hmm. No, and there is so little research on summer depression in general. I can count it on my two hands. Summer depression is not a topic yet, but it's coming. That's the main conclusion.
Okay.
But yeah, I will totally, so all the international listeners, if you're interested in summer depression, I would totally be up for international projects with measurements in many countries. In the hotter countries, of course, we in Iceland do not have much of summer depression.
I'm walking every day by the police station, and half of the police cars, private cars, don't change their spikes within the legal frame. So
no, they don't.
It's not really a surprise that they don't enforce the law.
Yeah, right.
One question, are there statistics, are there numbers? Is there a higher increase of lung cancer in Akureyri, for example?
Yeah,
can this be shown?
That's a good question. I mean, what we have surprisingly a lot is asthma in kids. Lung cancer, I mean, I don't know whether the difference between, for example, Reykjavik and Akureyri would be significant, because Reykjavik has less particulate matter than Akureyri, but still a lot. I have looked into the statistics Iceland once, and I tried to do a little correlation between particulate matter and lung cancer in all Iceland. The cases are so few in this country because we are so few that it's difficult to draw a conclusion. The correlation was significant. I didn't do it particularly for Akureyri because there we have even fewer cases, and then the statistics are just garbage. But in Iceland on a whole, there is probably a significant relation. I mean, for this to be published, we are just too small, so you would need bigger countries. Like you can do it in Norway. They have also particulate matter and spikes problems there.
Actually, one thing that would be interesting, let's see if I can catch this, is even though we have relatively few cases of cancer overall, I imagine, without being an expert in this particular topic, that the epigenetic changes that you talked about earlier, I imagine that you see certain types of changes in these epigenetic markers with increased exposure to particulates. It'd be kind of interesting to actually, maybe like do some epigenetic sequencing of the specific cancers that we do have to see if those types of changes actually correlate-ish with, the increase in particulate matter. It might be a little bit of a more sexy way of studying it since we have such a limited sample size to work with.
Yes, and we have also the expertise in genetics.
Yeah, just send it to Kari. I'm sure he'd do it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. If there are no very urgent and pressing questions, I would like to say we can continue this discussion with some coffee, and I hope it's being served out there now. So we have a little break, after which we will continue here. And thank you so much for coming and for your attention.